Today's topic is AZPOST, the process that the state board goes through when it's considering actions against the peace officer's certification. I'm Steve Serbalik, and I'm an attorney with AZCOPS in Arizona. The state maintains minimum certification requirements for peace officers, and the Arizona Peace Officer Standards and Training Board, AZPOST, is the entity that enforces those standards. Today, I'll cover what the phases of an AZPOST investigation are, the possible AZPOST sanctions, and tips for officers concerned about facing an AZPOST action. Know that this is a basic summary. If you have questions, in fact, if you receive any notice that AZPOST is looking into your conduct, ask for help. The first phase of an AZPOST investigation is how the officer gets on their radar. Agencies are legally required to notify AZPOST when an officer ends his or her service as a peace officer. Agents are required to, quote, check the box that tells AZPOST whether the agency knows of conduct that, if true, would rise to the level of an AZPOST rule violation. The box being checked is the most common way that AZPOST investigations start. Additionally, AZPOST sometimes starts investigation based on citizen complaints or by their own independent action. After the matter's on AZPOST radar, staff investigators conduct a file review. They gather any information that the officer's agency has, and they may conduct their own interviews. Next is board consideration. If the AZPOST compliance specialists determine that the alleged actions are consistent with the type of cases that the board might take action on, they present it to the board to decide whether the board will initiate proceedings. If the board decides to initiate proceedings, then the officer receives formal notice that their certification's on the line. The officer has the right to a hearing before an administrative law judge who determines if the conduct violated post rules. If the officer does not respond, the allegations are deemed admitted. After a hearing, the board considers the case once again to decide if there'll be any action against the officer's certification. This brings us to the possible AZPOST board actions. The board can decide to take no action or take no action and allow agency discretion. This decision can occur at the initiation phase or at the final review, and means that the officer will not have any limits placed on his or her certification. The board can also decide to resolve in the future. This only applies to inactive officers and would trigger a board review if the officer decides to reactivate his or her certification. The board can suspend a certification for a period of time or until the certification lapses, or, most significantly, the board can decide to revoke the officer's certification. Revocation is mandatory if an officer receives a felony conviction. Now that you know what the AZPOST board can do, here's what to do if you are under investigation. First, get help right away. AZPOST staff is experienced, and AZPOST action is heavily based upon past practice. Get with an experienced lawyer as soon as possible to mitigate the chances of a formal AZPOST action. If the board does decide to initiate proceedings, stand by for a long process. AZPOST cases can take literally years to resolve. Finally, consider your future. Some issues might allow your career as a police officer to survive an AZPOST action, but if your case involves integrity violations, you may not be able to be an officer again. If that's the case, you may consider surrendering your AZPOST certification and avoiding the entire process. A surrender has the same impact as a revocation, so seek help when considering your options. Experienced representation can help you understand your case and possible AZPOST outcomes. So here's the recap. We covered the phases of an AZPOST investigation: initial referral, staff investigation, board consideration, hearing or default, and final board action. We also covered possible AZPOST board decisions: no action, resolve in the future, suspension, and revocation. Next, we covered tips that you should have if you face AZPOST action. Stand by, be prepared for the long haul, and consider the elements of your case. AZPOST actions are serious and should be taken seriously. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and ask. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button below and subscribe for more law enforcement lessons. I'm Steve Serbalik. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.